Grand global wealth transfer, treasuries to gold by numerous countries.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today is part 2 of the interview with Jim Willie, where he talks quite a bit more about how he sees gold and silver reacting to some of the events happening right now in the months ahead. So I think you'll enjoy what you're about to hear. And let's take it to Jim.
When there's no good monetary policy, we're going to get a surprise in the next couple months. It could be a primary bond dealer going bankrupt, saying, well, we got promises from the Fed to help us, take in funds in order to buy the treasuries, which is all improper, but they only gave us half of what we needed. We have to declare bankruptcy. I'm not talking about a Wall Street bank. I'm talking about a secondary bank acting as a primary bond dealer under contract to buy unsold bond at auction. There's no way out. Can I go to my list?
Please, please. And actually, what you were mentioning about the Fed a couple moments ago reminded me of a few weeks back when Jerome Powell was going in front of the Senate one day and then the House the next day. I wonder if we're not far from the point where he tells one, we're going to lower rates, then goes to the House, says we're going to hike rates, and just see if we get the best of both worlds all in the same week. I mean,
they are doing that, but they're doing that over time. Like 1 week they'll do that, and 2 weeks later they'll do the opposite. They're showing you that they have no options. The depression means they need to cut rates. The inflation means they need to raise rates. You cannot sell a bond with rates going down when inflation is going up. You can't do it. They don't show up. And we're handing money under the table, Chris, to England, to Belgium, and to Ireland. We're handing money under the table for them to show up and buy our bonds. And it's not showing up on the tick report because they're giving it right back under the table, and it's going to the Fed balance sheet. Before I get to my list, I'm going to talk to you briefly about what I call a paradox. Foreigners are selling treasury bonds at a record rate. We've got a tremendous amount of supply of bonds. The Department of Treasury is obligated to buy back the bonds. And the Fed is where they put the bonds. So how's the Fed reducing their balance sheet? They're not. They're lying. Or we're tapping the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And let's just leave that for a future date to discuss. Foreigners are selling a huge amount of treasuries. The government's got to buy it, the Treasury Department. They put it on the Fed balance sheet. We got a tremendous amount of bond supply to sell. They're unsuccessful auctions, which means we put a lot on the balance sheet after monetizing them. So how's the Fed reducing their balance sheet?
Well, okay. Jim, one question about that is similar to what we've talked last time about with the some of the foreign holdings. Would the Fed's balance sheet be going down also just partially in response to the loss in value of some of the assets they hold? So not necessarily from when we look from the top to the bottom where we are now, and I'll pull up that chart, but would there also be some of that is accounted for by the loss in value of the securities under the higher rates?
I think they sold a lot of corporate bonds and mortgage bonds. If I had a similar chart showing mortgage bonds owned by the Fed, and it was down 200 billion from peak. So they've got corporate bonds, they got mortgage bonds, they got treasury bonds. They're not all the same. Okay. Part of this paradox is if the Fed is actually selling bonds, who the hell is buying them? I'm telling you right now, and I don't want to get into this deeper, I believe they're tapping the Exchange Stabilization Fund. Okay? Rob Kirby thought that it had 15 to 20 trillion in it. I told Rob that I yield to him because, I'm using my emotional IQ. I'm a team builder. Rob is a better bank analyst than I ever was, or he was than I ever will be, because he was murdered by remdesivir. I told him I thought there were 8 to 10 trillion in the exchange stabilization fund, and we never gave back the Saudis their huge chunk that they asked for 6 years ago. As I said, I don't want to get into the exchange stabilization fund. It's a big topic. I believe that we're tapping it, and it's to buy time. And I also believe the White Alliance has captured Wall Street, which means they captured the New York Fed, which means they control the exchange stabilization fund. It's run by the New York Fed. Okay, I'd like to get to my list at kind of a conclusion, crescendo. And I need my glasses because I'm no longer a young man. But, if you see me on a bicycle or you see me in horizontal exercises, I'm actually quite strong. We have, number one, the government debt default and treasury bond default. Number two, monetization of the debt for all unsold and refunded treasury bonds. Number three, a constant status of higher price inflation, because we're not fixing anything. And this is a supply chain based inflation. Number four, grand global wealth transfer, treasuries to gold by numerous countries. Number five, bank depositors, like people who have got a lot of money. They're taking money out of the bank and they're buying gold. Number six, the BRICS nations are creating non-dollar payment systems. They're all de-dollarizing. And that means they're dumping treasuries. When you dump the treasuries, you get a gold push, you get a gold stimulus. Number seven, the resentment over dollar weaponization. It gets mentioned, dollar weaponization, but it doesn't get talked about, Chris, for the consequences. The consequences are, if you're being weaponized, if you're being a victim of a weaponization, you're going to want to get rid of what they're using to weaponize. So you sell the dollar, you buy gold. Number eight.
Jim?
Yeah.
One quick note on what you just mentioned there that I don't know if a lot of people have seen. You probably did, but this was a story last week that the U.S. is now looking at sanctioning Chinese banks if they aid Russia's war machine, according to Janet Yellen. So obviously would just further exacerbate point number 7 if this were something that did end up happening.
Well, I read things like that, and my immediate reaction is that the United States is going to become isolated with even more nations. They basically patted her on the head and kicked her out of the country. And notice that when Yellen was in China, urging them to produce fewer electric vehicles, urging them to buy less silver, urging them to buy less gold, the gold market went up and the silver market went up, and it was a gigantic FU. So it's almost a non-story. All right, I'm going to continue. Number 8. There's a hidden agenda by the central banks, and this was expressed in the 1990 decade by a former Basel BIS chairman named Zielstra. Zielstra said in the 1990 decade that in the next couple of decades, the Rothschild central banks are going to face intolerable insolvency, and the only way out will be for them to load up on gold in secrecy and send the gold price to $3,000, $5,000, and then $10,000. The central banks will do it to get out of insolvency. And the follow-on effect of that is if they don't, they're going to become irrelevant. They're not going to become irrelevant, so they're going to buy gold. Number 9, the inflationary depression in the United States is becoming more and more evident. Falsified economic statistics. We've got now like 5 or 6 categories for price inflation and they're all double the official aggregate stated price inflation. They're saying it's 3, 4, 5%. We've got numerous items that are 8, 10%. Okay, not believed. Inflationary depression, there's no way out. Can't raise rates, can't cut rates, just like I said before. The big insolvent banks are in the same position as the central banks. They've gotten rid of the GLD, the inventory, so they cannot short the gold market anymore. They got almost $1 trillion in unrealized losses for bonds. They never say that those assets are treasury bonds. They can't sell them, Chris, because from convexity, it would force a snowball effect and a bond default. The big banks are loading up in gold. I did a consult call with a fund manager a few months ago. He said, Jim, every Wall Street bank has gold and they're doubling their gold. Every Wall Street bank has gold and they're doubling their gold. Number 11, China and Japan are supporting their currencies that are each in trouble. They buy more gold. They fortify their currency by buying gold. If you have a currency that's in trouble, buying gold strengthens it and reduces some of the stress. We have a geopolitical shift now, number 12, from west to east. And it means that the US, UK, Swiss banksters are going to be less in charge. And we've got to yield to the east with China, Russia, Persia. I'm telling you, this is a monumental shift. Number 13, the von Mises, they're often called the Austrian School of Economics. Well, that's their official name. I call it the von Mises School. But there's a von Mises corollary that when you're done ruining things with the paper global currency, you go to a metal. You don't go to a different paper. You go to metal, and that's gold. Number 14, this is really quite upsetting for us Americans to admit. The trust in all things American is now eroding and going away. I'm talking about banking, financial markets, economic statistics, warfare, news networks, social nonsense, and political fascism. We are now considered a goofy, neurotic, corrupt nation from our leadership. Number 15, this is a really favorite item of mine because it relates to the Andes and the mining projects. It was about 3 or 4 years ago, one by one, they closed down silver mining projects and blamed it on COVID risks for their workers. I thought, what a great pretext. They don't like the low price for silver, so they're going to close their mines for the fake pandemic. Wonderful. Hey, got news for people. 18 to 24 months to reopen those mines. Okay, while we're launching upward toward 50 in the silver price in the next few months, several months, 50, the mines will not be able to respond to meet the demand. We're going to continue up. Number 16, global debt as a ratio to GDP is now 330% globally. And I believe the United States is somewhere around 130 or 140%. There's a general rule of thumb, Chris. When your debt for a nation is over 100%, you have a depression and an economic financial failure. There is no exception in modern history. Number 17, a rapid introduction of digital currencies. We've already seen the Russian ruble digital. We've already seen the Chinese yuan digital. We're going to see more and more. Iran, Persia will come out with theirs. Number 18, on-demand liquidity of XRP will become a very big issue. It means if you want to use XRP, doesn't matter how much you need, on-demand liquidity will be there, and the BRICS nations announced their blockchain platforms. Number 19, the rising specter of war. If you ask some rum-dum in Wall Street, why is gold going up? He'll say credit crisis, the threat of price inflation, and war. Well, I got 17 other reasons. Yeah, war is an important point. 19. Number 20 is controversial. It's dark money. I was told 7 or 8 years ago that Langley, and you know who I mean by Langley, that they own a couple of dozen containers in the Greek ports. Piraeus is their major, but the Greek ports. Every container, you know, like the standard one you see on the back of a truck. Every container holds something like $357 billion in shrink-wrapped $100 bills. Do you really think Langley is going to leave it in the form of $100 bills sitting on Greek ports? Or do you think they're going to start gradually converting it to gold? Now, the narco money goes into cash. The narco money also goes into buying foreign banking systems. I'm going to make an outrageous comment, Chris. I believe Papa Bush and their $8 to $10 trillion in narco money bought the entire nation of Colombia. I heard a long time ago they bought the banking system. And I said, well, golly, what are you going to do with the other $7 trillion? The president of Colombia several years ago was the head of the Medellin cartel. Let that sink in. I have stories because I know I know a couple men who have Colombian sweethearts and wives. I get stories about Colombia. The Bush family bought the entire hospital sector. They bought the entire medical sector. They bought the entire banking sector. How hard would it be to buy the rest of that little country? It's known for its cocaine. And by the way, that war between the Medellin and the Cali cartels, long resolved, about 8 or 9 years ago. And I know what I'm talking about. The dark money is going to find gold. You hear a lot of arguments that Bitcoin is going up because the money's not going into gold. And I say, well, are you nuts? Are you a lunatic? It's going into both. There's a lot of dark money. Where do you think the Mexican drug money is going to go? You think they're going to invest in more oil properties? You think they're going to buy more ports? Sorry, the Chinese bought them all. The Mexicans are going to go to gold. They're going to go to big gold bars. All right, I mentioned the revised Operation Sandman. 20 countries at least, 2 trillion at least, 2 years at least. We've got the longest gold bull market in history coming. Get on board, and if you're dumb enough to sell at 2,500, you're going to be regretting it when it's 3,000. If you're dumb enough to sell silver at 32, you're going to regret it when it's 48. Don't sell. We've got Fibonacci at work in silver, not in gold. Fibonacci in silver, 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, 130. If you think 130 is an outrageous figure, get back to me in the year 2026. I greatly enjoy, Chris, being told an effing idiot. I was told that I was an effing idiot in 2000, late 6 and early 7, when I said Lehman and Fannie Mae were going to go bankrupt and fail. I was told I was an effing idiot in 2008 when I said we're going to 0%. I was told that I was an effing idiot in 2011 when I said we're going to do the same thing that Japan did and do quantitative easing, buying our own bonds. I was told I was an effing idiot in 2015 when I said there's going to be a gold trade note, might go by a different name, and it's going to come out of the Eurasian trade zone. It's called the BRICS, it's called the gold token. So, you want to call me an idiot? Fine. I've got a brain trust behind me from my good, solid emotional IQ, there are 7 of us, 2 have been murdered. Okay? 1 murdered and 1 I highly suspect was murdered. I got a brain trust, and you know, I feel very fortunate, Chris. I have this group of colleagues. One guy is an information expert. One guy is an expert on COMEX and you know, FOMC announcements and economic statistics and a whole lot of other things. And another one is an expert in finance internationally. I've got another one who's kind of a research arm. He was a research arm for the vaccine, for the pandemic that didn't exist, for, you know, immune system, for artificial intelligence, for the Ukraine war. I've got a lot of colleagues who support me and help me out. So it's really hard to fool the 7 of us combined. And I got to mention, because it's an obligation from my heart that if it weren't for the aid that I've received, principally from Christians, I would have closed this down in 2020. I would not have continued. I got more aid yesterday, and it lifts my spirits. They're wonderful people. And in addition to the Christian crowd, there are the truth warriors. Jim, you're spouting the truth. You're on a soapbox. You're opposing corruption. You're telling the truth, and you're being harmed. I'm going to help you. That's just great. That's just great. So, you know, I'm under assault, Chris. I've got actually some well-meaning clients who tell me, Jim, don't talk about how you're under assault. I say, why don't you do a newsletter? Why don't you undergo assault? And why don't you try not to talk about assault? I have at least 15 Three Sigma events, each one of them very costly. I don't know anybody who's had 5 electrical fires in 2+ years. I doubt anybody in the audience has more than 1, and most of them, probably 98%, have never had an electrical fire. Okay, remember, fire is the favorite of the Satanists in April. Today is the day for celebration of fire, April 15th. If you look, Rob Kirby asked me in 2014, Jim, here's a list of 7 or 8 events. Waco, Texas with the Branch Davidians, and a number of other events. And like 12 out of 15 occurred in April. He said, Jim, can you do a probability for me on that? So it would be 12 events happening in April, 3 events happening in a non-April month. And my answer back to him was, Rob, I think, based on memory, I think it was something like 1 in 12 million. Okay, they like April, they like fire, and I've been victimized. I've been victimized by fire. I've also been victimized by car crashes, which is also a form of fire because the gasoline catches. I've had 7 dead people. I've had 3 fatal car crashes. I've had numerous other events. It's about 15 different Three Sigma events. So if you want to help me out, keep me on the air, fine, great, much appreciated. This gold rally will not be a rally. It'll be they're going to call it soon an intermediate gold bull market. And then later they're going to call it a long-term gold market, because this thing has years to go. Just watch the central banks and their tricky language. Watch how Basel soon will not interrupt the silver march over 30. I got word back, Chris, in August of 2020. JP Morgan has 200 million ounces of silver given to them by Basel to make sure they did not get over $30 in late 2020. They did not. So in my September 2020 letter, I said, don't expect silver to go over 30. They're going to knock it back. They knocked it back for 4 years. We're all excited now. Silver is at 28, 29. Well, that's where it was in 2020. 3.5 years Zero progress, which means we've got to make up for lost time and get over 50. That's where we're going, over 50. Get ready. Chris, this is exciting, but it's also scary because the evil ones, the cabal, they're going to try to do their, health treaty with the WHO and the United Nations. They're going to try to sabotage our economy. We need to defuse them. We need to cut off their legs, cut off their funding, sack their bank accounts, and get on to the reset in a positive framework. And that's where I think we're going, a positive framework. Notice that the eclipse of, what was it? The 8th of April. Okay, it was a non-event. Okay, we had all kinds of expectations, but we still have not seen the 10-day to 2-week effect of dropping bacteria from the sky. We haven't seen the effect of that yet. We need one more week, Chris, to conclude nothing happened. Okay. By virtue of all the other potential types of events, like a chicken farm on fire with 20,000 chickens inside, these chicken hotels are really quite phenomenal. They're like 5 and 6 stories. They're like 150 yards long, 20 yards wide. All they are chickens laying eggs. And if you destroy it, they come right back in 6 months. That's why the egg prices got reduced. Okay, we did not see. Oh, there was a couple other barges on the Ohio River. There was actually a barge in my hometown, Pittsburgh, that got caught, but it didn't wreck a bridge. They're going to try to wreck bridges like Baltimore. They're going to try to blow up food processing plants. They're going to try to light fires to chicken hotels. And they haven't been able to do much in the last several months. It was really a 2022 phenomenon. We're winning. And evidence is a fast rising gold and silver price. We're winning. And the bankers are going to join it if they want to avoid irrelevance. Chris, this is exciting. Sorry about the bright light there.
No, it's good to see you in the light. And certainly, yeah, it has been a lot happening, especially in these past 2 months. And you mentioned that $30 level in silver. And on this past Friday, just about a dime away, I think it got up to $29.90, somewhere in that area. And yes, that has seemed to be a line in the sand over these past couple of years. Last question before we wrap up, Jim. You talked about this a little bit before of a BRICS token. Obviously, we've been hearing since around this time last year, there was the speculation of them creating some sort of payment mechanism, which did not happen, obviously, last year. And it's interesting, even the commentary out of Russia, certainly Sergei Glaziev has talked quite a bit about how he sees things being done. He said that the Russian central bank has actually been the one pushing back on some of these plans so far. I've also heard speculation that Project Embridge might be going live in the second quarter, but would be curious to hear anything that you've seen or heard about what they may be planning, if you have any idea of how soon or imminent something like that could be.
I like to keep things simple as possible for maintaining sanity and when there's just too much on the plate. I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to learn what Embridge is. I believe it's some form of payment system involving gold. Okay, here's my simplistic perception. The BRICS are in absolutely no hurry to install other non-dollar options. They're in no hurry at all. They can rely on the Chinese yuan because China said on a temporary basis you can do that. In Eastern Europe, they're using more and more ruble for settlement. With India, Russia has a problem. India wants to use the rupee. Russia's saying, we'd rather you not pay us in rupee. And Russia would prefer the the Gulf region types like the dirham out of UAE, United Arab Emirates. India is pushing back on that. We have now the blockchain that is being built out as a platform. That opens the door to XRP. Its on-demand liquidity makes it a great candidate. I don't believe the BRICS feel as though they're in any urgency to get their various options out there and to get their channels fully ramped up, because they see a treasury bond default, because they see a government debt for the United States that's gone out of control. So there's going to be a lot of gold demand. And as you get the gold demand for higher prices, it's going to create fever. And I think the Eastern nations know that we're going over 3,000 for gold a lot better than the Western nations do. Therefore, they're going to continue with their gold load, increasing their gold reserves to make available usage of the gold token. The gold token requires the parties to have adequate gold reserves behind the token. You can't just say, well, we're going to use the gold token. Well, do you have the gold behind the token? That's what they're doing now. It's going to be Russia, China, Persia, and Saudi providing the gold. And China will be more the dynasties than it will be the government. The government is, I tell you, the government, they're coming out with all this information about the People's Bank of China and all their increases in gold. Oh my gosh, they're buying probably 10 times that off the book. I'm looking forward to the various devices like Embridge, like XRP, like the blockchain. What else will the blockchain permit payments for? In what form? The blockchain for the BRICS. I'm thinking the digital yuan. I'm thinking the digital ruble. And there's going to be a digital rial out of Iran very soon. Iran and Persia, same thing. They like being called Persia, and the West calls them Iran. I like calling it Persia because this guy gets on my case. I got a client. He's living in Europe, but he's Persian. The West likes to think that Persia is really backward. Well, they're not. The West likes to think they're way behind in the nuclear development. They're not. The West likes to think Persia is way behind in armaments and weaponry. They're not. Nor are they way behind in their financial progress toward the Bitcoin, the cryptos. I believe China does not want standard yuan in the form of government bond. They do not want them in foreign hands. But I don't believe China has any problem at all with foreigners using in transactions digital yuan because it's backed by gold. If they have a lot of foreigners like the French and Italian and the Dutch all buy a truckload of Chinese government bonds, then China is vulnerable by foreign action. But if the same three countries own a bunch of digital yuan on the blockchain, that is not a risk to China. It's like the counterparty risk is eliminated. Okay. It's like holding gold, but on the ledger, blockchain ledger. Okay, these are exciting times, Chris, and I'm really jazzed. It's funny, the personal distress is increasing while the gold price is going up. And I've talked to you privately about some of the details, but please go sign up for the newsletter, golden-jackass.com. I've got the consult button in blue, and it's partly because I like North Carolina, the Tar Heels, baby blue. I'm available for consults. I do them every week, and I've done 720 of them in 4 years. And believe me, that is boots on the ground, additional information that helps me understand what's going on. The donate button is no longer PayPal or PayPuke, whatever you want to call them. I've avoided that nasty fascist wing. Hit the donate button, help me out, small or large. The sponsor button is for wealthier people who want to help me in a big way. And honestly, Chris, I fall to my knees and thank the Lord when I get a sponsor button hit, because it aids me in a big way. I need aid. I need to continue. And without that aid, I would have been gone 3 years ago. This is extraordinary. And I had some well-meaning clients say to me recently, Jim, do you think you're being attacked financially so that you'll go off the air and shut down your newsletter? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's been great. And I always appreciate your support. And yeah, that silver Bernanke helicopter, it's just looking better all the time. I think it should excrete paper poop, though. So if you get the design team working on that, excrete paper puke on your silver helicopter. Oh boy, boy, these are wild times. If you told me when I was in college that we would work up a $34 trillion debt by going off to the gold standard with constant war for 30 years, I'd say you're crazy, you're drunk. And that is our reality. The way out is the gold standard. It won't solve everything. And I believe fervently the United States will be on the gold standard and will climb out of this depression in rapid style. We're in an economic inflationary depression.
And Jim, you did see that the Philadelphia Fed actually put out a paper in January studying the impact of a gold standard, and they did come to the conclusion that over the long term it does stabilize prices. So I thought that was an interesting one to see them pop that out there. World Bank also putting out hand guide for investment managers to invest in gold. So who knows? Who knows?
They're setting the stage for the Rothschild central banks to load up on gold quietly and secretly. And then once we get near 3,000, they're going to push it to 3,000 flat, 5,000 then in the following, who knows, several weeks. And in the following months, 10,000. And miraculously, the Rothschild central banks will work their way out of insolvency. And to do that, they need a lot of gold. You don't just buy, 20 tons of gold and, oh my gosh, we're out of insolvency because the price went up fourfold. That's nonsense. They got to buy a lot of gold and they will not be selling it. Those people who think, my gosh, there's so much gold out there, it's going to go down in price. I say there are a lot of televisions out there and they're not for sale and the price is not going down. There are a lot of shoes out there. They're not for sale. The price of shoes is not going down. It's one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard from smart people. Anyway, thanks for having me on, Chris. As you can hear, I'm losing my voice, but we're having fun.
Well, pleasure as always to have you here, Jim, and certainly a lot happening right now. And obviously people can find out more at golden-jackass.com and hit the sponsor, consulting, donate, or buttons, or sign up for the newsletter, which I love reading every month and certainly put a lot in there. And I appreciate your keeping track of so many things that are going on. So you take good care of yourself, Jim, and we will catch up and do this again soon. And who knows what the gold and silver markets will look like by then.
Only higher price. The pullbacks are not going to be long. They're going to be intraday pullbacks and there'll be intra-week pullbacks, but they're not going to last long. Jump on them, people. Jump on them.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye on it. So thank you, Jim. You take good care of yourself, and we'll be in touch, and we'll pick this up soon.
Okay.
Well, thank you as always to the great Dr. Jim Willie, a fan favorite, and it is sure always fun to catch up with him, see what he is looking at and what he's making of all the things that are going on in what should be an eventful year, already has been. And of course, we do have the election coming up in just a couple months as well. So we'll look forward to checking back in with Jim. And before we wrap up, I did want to thank Miles Franklin for bringing us today's video. And Miles Franklin currently running a special on junk silver, the pre-1965 dimes and quarters, for only $275 over spot. And of course, junk silver was one of the products where we did see a big spike in premiums, and certainly good to be able to get junk silver at a low premium now, in case we should see something like that again in the future, and also one of the more popular forms of silver. So you can find out more by calling 833-326-4653 or emailing us at arcadia@milesfranklin, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. Or if you want to go ahead and purchase junk silver, that's how to reach us. So with that said, going to wrap up. Hope you're having a great day out there, and I'll see you again tomorrow.